Did Mom and Dad get back? Just coming back as fast as
It can always be Kyler as long as he wants to be.
Yeah, that'd be nice to have somebody else on there. For sure.
9:09. I've never attempted to start at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, heaven forbid.
That would be ridiculous.
Only a mark on the clock, right?
Yeah. Which is interesting because usually I'm pretty worried about time stuff.
Well, we kind of get programmed that way, especially when we're going to school
Yeah, it's one of those things
and
that
have 9 to 5 jobs or whatever.
I gotta check myself on sometimes. I'm really, really anxious about something worth being anxious about usually. You know?
I was looking at a little Facebook thing this morning, Isaiah 14:27. What kind of gets me work for the country?
Yeah, that's really good. You can feel free to read that if you want. Or I don't know who's doing that. Scripture reading.
I'm doing songs, so I'm guessing Dave Myers is
Alright.
up for that.
Do you have announcements? Yeah. Dave did.
Well,
He may not know.
No, you got announcements.
all right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
If you're an adult and you know it and you want to come to class, come on in. How are you? Okay. Good. All right. Again, good morning. Hope you guys are doing well this morning. We are going to get back into the book of Acts for Bible class here a little bit. We will be starting off fresh in chapter 25 here in just a moment. But before we do that, I just want to recap about 24 a little bit, talk about where we were last week, and then we can hop into 25 and start reading it a little bit. But 24, we kind of see kind of the whole story of Paul with Felix, I guess is how you could say it. He's in Caesarea, and we see kind of Paul put on trial at the beginning of chapter 24. We see Paul being put on trial, and kind of took a few interesting things from that. The fact that they're making this kind of a legal proceeding, and the Jews are actually like hiring a lawyer, basically. But what we talked a lot about was kind of the end of chapter 24, talking about Felix and how, because of all of everything that Paul was stirring up and nothing really coming of the trial, Felix kept Paul in custody, basically. He kept him in prison, and from what we gathered, at least 2 years. He was kept basically in Felix's basement for at least 2 years, right? Some of the interesting things we talked about with that, though, is at the end of 24, we see that Felix is no longer. We don't know if he was let go or he left on his own accord, but my version says 2 years had elapsed. Felix was succeeded, and then he left Paul in prison. So we know that he got kind of replaced in some way or another. And then also, we talked about how Felix and his wife may have been curious about the gospel. They may not have been in either, but we kind of talked about how it sure seemed like, because they went down and asked Paul, after knowing of the way, knowing of the church, more questions of him. So it seemed like he may have kind of known and kind of wanted to know more about the church. Craig? Oh.
Yeah, he really seemed like he was really interested until he got to self-control, until Paul started talking about self-control.
Yeah.
That kind of
D- Dave had some good comments on that, on some of the footnotes in his Bible kind of led down the path of how Felix's wife seemed to have, been a Jew. We know that, we read that, but she seemed to have left her other husband to be with Felix. And so if Paul was going to get him on self-control and, kind of turn him off, and that he came pretty hard on that one, it seemed like. But yeah, I think, again, that was just my opinion, but I do think they were curious about the church in some way. Whether or not they were ready to devote their lives, well, we can kind of tell not really, because it kind of scared them away. Literally scared, frightened is the word my version used. And then also, we still see the whole time that Felix is asking for a little let you out of prison quietly money the whole time. So, any comments on 24 that we didn't get to talk about last week? Or Dennis, if you had one, you weren't here last week, so if you had one, you're free to. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and pick up in chapter 25 of the book of Acts. Chapter 25, we'll read the first 12 verses together this morning. 25, verse 1. Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning to ambush and kill him along the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept in Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. Verse 5. So, said he, let the men of authority among you go down with me. And if there is anything wrong about that man, let them bring charges against him. Verse 6. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered that Paul be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could neither prove or not prove. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Verse 9. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. And if then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, and to Caesar you shall go. So we just ended off in verse 12 of chapter 25. So in the end of chapter 24, we have Felix transferring to Festus, and then we pick up with Festus right there in verse 1. So as soon as Festus is in the area, it seems like the Jews are trying to convince him to take Paul to Jerusalem. So he's in Caesarea right now, and they want to take him to Jerusalem. Why do they want him to go to Jerusalem? There's a couple of reasons here, but one's straight out said.
Just killed him.
Want to kill him along the way. Want to ambush the guard on the way. Okay?
I don't know if you talked about this in 23, but this is interesting because this is the second time
Yeah.
when we talk about ambushing Paul.
Yep.
These Jews hate Paul so much
Yeah,
years.
that's
They're
true.
again planning on killing him. So Paul has stirred up some seriously strong feelings.
Yeah. In 23, when we talked about where they first plotted to kill Paul, that would be about verse 12, 13. And they made a vow to bound themselves to an oath to not eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. So, talk about, in retrospect, looking at this whole thing. The first time, they said, we're not going to eat or drink until we commit this.
Didn't say that again, did they?
I guess not, but to back to Terry's point here, like, it's been years, probably closer to 3 than 2, because we know he was just held captive for at least 2. And they still have this much fire of hatred towards Paul that they want to put themselves in major danger and go kill him.
And the funny thing that sticks out, did with Christ too, was that the Jews, which were his people, were lying, conniving, and the Romans were pagans, were the ones that trying to
Save him?
do right and trying to was on Christ's side. It was a weird thing, man. Well, same way here.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about the attorney, the lawyer talked about how Lystra, Lysia, the commander, as much violence took Paul away from him. Well, actually, what they saw was when they came down there trying to beat him to death.
Yeah.
They manually took him away from him. They switched the whole daggone thing on them. Remember, the Jews, the lying, the people of God were the liars, and the pagans were the ones that tell the truth.
Sad. But yeah, you're right. The first time Paul gets taken into custody is how we'd say it, right? Taken by the guard, was because, the scripture says, because the crowd was trying to tear him in two, trying to tear him apart. So literally, they were fighting over him in this fact that they thought, the Jews at least, had thought he'd done so much wrong. And that's why it was so confusing that everyone thought that Paul was causing riots. When the Roman guard first took him, they thought he was the Egyptian that had been causing riots in the city for weeks, because just Paul's presence was so polarizing that people would go both sides, right? So they wanted to take him to Jerusalem because they wanted to kill him on the way. What's another reason? If they didn't quite get the killing on the way done, what would be another reason Jerusalem would be handy?
That's the Jewish center.
These work together, though, but more easily prosecuted because it's Jew center, right? They would win the case there. They wouldn't have any Roman authority that would say no. They would just step in and just completely take out Paul, right? So, not to give Paul a fair trial, but to give Paul a losing trial is why they would want him in Jerusalem.
I think probably kill him in front of the Roman soldiers, and that probably would make a difference. The only time it makes a difference when the Jews on a Jew is if it causes a riot. They don't like that. They want to keep everything calm. If you do it, if you kill them and not have any ways, no problem. They have no problem with killing Jews.
And that probably would be true before Rome knew that Paul was a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now
Now it's good.
it's a problem.
Now they have a commitment they have to uphold because they do for all of their Roman citizens, right? And when we talked about a couple chapters ago, I believe it's 23, where Paul first says, I'm a Roman citizen, and they say, well, how much did you buy that for? He didn't buy it, and so that means that they were trying to have at least some out and say, oh, well, no. He's a full-born Roman citizen.
Blue blood.
Yeah, so they will defend him and they will protect him because he is Roman. He truly is. He never bought it. He never acquired. He was born. So basically, Festus kind of puts that on a stop and saying, well, let's talk to Paul and see what he wants, which is an interesting thing. But obviously, Paul wants to be tried there. He knows what would happen in Jerusalem as well. We see yet again Paul making a defense for himself in verse 7 and 8. Verse 7 says, the Jews had come down from Jerusalem. They stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. They could not prove. And then verse 8, Paul argued in his defense. He said, "Neither against the Jews, nor the temple, nor Caesar have I committed any offense." I just wanted to point that out again, just like we did in the last chapter of Paul is making a defense. He's making an apologia here. That's the same word that we used last week, but it's like apologetics. It's proving why we have our faith, and for him it's proving why he's done nothing wrong here. And so just pointing out the fact that it's not wrong in all cases to make a defense for yourself. Terry?
The NIV words it slightly differently, and I like that it says he's done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against Caesar. Because I don't know that you can really say he's done nothing against the Jews.
People.
He is supporting a change in everything, but he hasn't broken any of the Jewish law. He's simply, trying to say, hey, the Messiah has come, and they don't like that. But I like the fact that this version says he's done nothing wrong against the law of the Jews.
And my version says that as well. It says
There goes again. Jews are the ones sinning. You never accuse anybody without two witnesses. You can't, and they're breaking their own holy law. I have no problem with it.
I'll come to here in a second, Dave. Jews breaking their own law, does that surprise you? Does that sound...
Say what now?
Jews breaking their own law? Jews being a little bit hypocritical? Is that surprising? Or all right, Dave?
I don't know nothing about the Jewish law to totally interpret it, but when we're saying law, going against another Jew could be against their law, because I don't know what all their laws are. Again, you have to have two people against that, so is he,
Two witnesses.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a fine interpretation of it, I guess.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm
It's
not reading too much into the word law as going against.
going against, and it doesn't really
He's not
matter, I
going
don't
against the
think.
people. He's not trying to destroy the people.
Right, and I think the people will say it's against the law even if it's not. They would make the story work. Dennis? For them.
There's another place where he says a similar thing in the lines of, I've done nothing against the rules or the customs or something of the Jews. He's saying here that I think that he's kept his Jewish things. As a Jew, he could still be a Christian and do most of the Jewish stuff. I don't see him here saying, oh no, I did a 180, I'm totally against all things Old Testament, pre-cross, like some people have made him out to be. And he basically was a Jew to his death, just like Jesus was. And because this ain't the only place it says that, it's talking about the law of the Jews or the temple.
Both.
And so I don't know, I think sometimes people make too strong of a thing that he dropped all Jewishness to become a Christian. I think they're going way beyond what's written.
Well, we know that he has not because of discussing with Timothy about circumcision, right? That's kind of one of the best examples we have of. And I don't think that was an easy conversation.
Well,
We
we
kind
just
of,
like to go back to the festivals, wanted to be Jerusalem, but Passover or whatever it was, Pentecost or whatever.
And the fact that this all started because he was keeping a Jewish vow.
yeah. So we have multiple things about Paul is obviously still, he's got his Jewish heritage and he's not leaving it. He's still being a Jew, but now he's a Christian Jew, I guess you would say, a Jew of the way. Nancy.
These Jews, I don't think they're going after Paul because he's broken the law. He's going after him because he's teaching Christ, and they're being dishonest, and their motives are not what they're saying they are.
We've read multiple times talking about their motives, and this is the word that always describes it: jealousy, right? So it seems like the reason they'll make the claim that he's breaking the law out of the fact that he's taking all the attention away from Jews and the temple and all of this and saying, look to Christ above that.
So
And so jealousy is a great word that's used over and over.
We need to look when somebody accuses someone, why? What is the underlying reasons?
It reduces their power and authority. They don't want them.
Yeah.
It makes the Jews no different than the silversmiths, worshiping the pagan arts.
It's all about greed, power.
Well, it makes them obsolete. So taking these three together, right? What do you need the Jewish leaders, the temples, any of this for? If the church is now open to everyone and it's across all of the globe and it can be in homes, and you don't need any of this Jewish stuff anymore. Yeah.
And they're being very short-sighted. They're thinking about the now, and they're not thinking about everlasting life.
No,
And,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they're not.
It
I-
takes the eliteness away either.
Yeah, it takes it, right, that's very true. And
The
you,
Jews were special.
and the Gentiles are now welcome. So there's no specialness in their mind anymore, except for,
That's
salvation.
opening up the country club to everybody.
Dennis?
Yeah, I've not heard it put this way before, but I think it's just, you've all been talking about it just now, it's I think their financial base is at risk, and in a way, they're no different than those ones that rioted, that were pagans about the great Diana of the Ephesians.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna lose their big income deal, and if because like the word you used was good, obsolete. The
Yeah.
Jewish system is now, it was not necessary for godly people to go through that route
Mm-hmm.
to please God.
Yeah, and Terry said that too about the idol makers, right? What's the purpose of idols if you don't worship them anymore, right? They're not going to be able to sell. They're not going to be able to have, and bring that back to the Jews. The Jews are just, what's the point of them anymore? All the leaders in the temples, right? So they become obsolete. And I don't think it's even thought through that much. I think it's just, Paul is a threat, let's eliminate him. I think that's kind of where the Jewish mindset is coming. Now, all of that is behind it, and whether they have worked it completely out in their brain or not, Paul is a threat, let's take him out. He's not fitting the mold, and he's causing people to come against us. Let's take him out. And the way that we see them trying to do that is make it about the Jewish law. And Paul says, I have nothing against the Jewish law or the temple or Caesar. I've done nothing. And he stands really strongly on that too, because towards the end of where we stopped here, verse 11, if I then am a wrongdoer and if I've committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, I appeal to Caesar. So he's standing very firmly on his appeal, but he's not wavering on the other way either. He says, if there really is something I've done wrong, I should deserve to die, which is a pretty bold statement. He's not going to step back from it if he has done anything wrong, but he hasn't, and he knows that.
And they know that too.
Yeah, I think they kind of do. They know what they've kind of created, and that's why they want to get him back to Jerusalem. That's why they want to kill him on the way, rather than get him to Jerusalem and give him some sort of trial. They just want to get rid of Paul. Paul's causing trouble. So then verse 12, where we stopped, after Festus had conferred with the council the last half here, he says to Paul, to Caesar you have appealed, and Caesar you shall go. So this is going to Caesar now. It's not going back to Jerusalem. It's not just going to be in the hands of the Jews. We're going to keep it official, and we're going to keep you protected, is kind of what he's saying with that. We're going to take you to Caesar. Any other comments? Till verse 13, and we'll pick back up reading. Okay, let's go ahead and read in 13 here for a little bit. Now when some days had passed, Agrippa the king of Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. As they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay. But on the next day I took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I had supposed. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who was dead, but Paul had asserted to be alive. Being at a loss of how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, you will hear him. Let's pause there for a second, because everything we read here, we already know. We've already heard the story of this, except for now we have a different perspective on it. It's pretty neat. Right here, we're kind of reading Festus's dialogue and his account of what's going on as he tells it to Bernice and the king from Agrippa. So he's kind of telling his side of the story of what all's gone on. He talks about what we already knew, that this prisoner, Paul, was left from Felix. And he said, I made haste to it to make it one of the first things I did in office. We already read that, right? And then he says, I made it all above board. I was going to have the accusers come and Paul be there and everybody do this official. It's my first job. But when the Jews came and they made their case against him, they really had no case at all. He said, I love how he said it here. Rather, verse 19, rather they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion and about who Paul, this Jesus, who was dead, and Paul asserted to be alive.
I probably thought it was my looking, what's going on?
Yeah, sure.
Weird.
Nancy.
I was just thinking about, this is just so crazy, I think, but then it just came to me that these guys, by accusing Paul and stuff, they're actually spreading the name of Jesus.
Yes, they
They're
are.
actually spreading them, and they're actually getting people who have never heard about him. They may be curious and they may have researched or something, and so.
Let's talk about a couple people we know.
Okay, let me interject.
Sure.
All things work together.
Sure.
For good of those who love God.
Absolutely. Let me point out just, I guess, 4 people who would probably never hear the gospel or of Jesus. This is where we're at. First, we had Felix. He had heard of the church, but he went down and talked to Paul about some stuff, so he heard more. We have Festus now, who is learning a lot more because he had no idea about this, right? He kind of stepped in and was a little naive first day in office. And now we have these 2 more men, Agrippa and Bernice,
Agrippa was
as a city.
Jew, wasn't he? He was a king.
Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea.
So I don't know how much he knew, but he was one of Herod's descendants, I think, was he not?
I don't know.
He was a Jew, I believe, anyway.
Okay. So I'm just saying, 4 people that we've read here in just 2 chapters that probably got exposed more or at all that would have never reached.
You might want to add 2 years of Roman guard rotation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At least 2 years, too, because I read that again here. He's never left prison even since, Felix has changed to Festus. So there's been some more time passing here. Even though Festus got right on it, you have to wait for people to arrive, and the days are just starting to add up and up. But, so, he's going with the flow and sharing the gospel with every person he's bumping into in prison, right? So basically, Festus says, I don't even know why this is in court. He's like, I don't know why this is before the guard. This is just religious disagreements, right? Jewish religious disagreements. But yet, I asked Paul if he wanted to go back to Jerusalem, and he said no. And so he's seeing through that a little bit as well, because they're still protecting Paul, and they know that over this religious disagreement, Paul will probably be killed if he's getting sent back to Jerusalem. So, we kind of ended in verse 22, and we'll read through the end of the chapter here in a second, but the visiting men say, well, we'd like to hear this Paul. He's got a lot of things to say, and he has a lot to say about a man who was dead and he's alive. We'd like to know about how that works exactly.
You know, back before radio and TV and everything else, stumping was a form of entertainment. Everybody, when Lincoln came in to do a speech,
Sure.
everybody in the country was the same way here, I think. You know, this is what we do. You know, everybody probably wanted to hear Paul because he was an eloquent speaker anyway. You know, and that's what they did.
Well, and that's we saw that in Athens. That's the whole reason that Paul even got anything happening in Athens is because they were like, this man is so absurd. Let's hear him and see what he has to say, right? And
Curiosity.
yeah,
And who knows during these proceedings, how many people are there listening?
I would imagine.
How many
Yeah,
were touched, how many were curious, how many,
and this reigns
Plant the
true.
seed.
What's that?
Planting the seed.
Plant the seed. This reigns true for Athens and Caesarea, kind of both in the same kind of centers of philosophy. We're looking at Caesarea, so we have kind of the Roman capital, right? And so the opportunity is there to have the people, to kind of, when he's on trial and it's kind of like a lecture series that people want to go listen to and see what's going on and learn from or just disagree with. They don't care, they still want to hear, which is very interesting and something we can actually maybe improve on in our culture.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments through verse 22 there? I just think it's cool seeing this other perspective from Festus about everything that's happened from his point of view. The new guy in office and what's going on. All right, let's finish out chapter 25 here. Verse 23 is where we'll pick up. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with a great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petition me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death. And as he himself appeared to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. So why are they having this little session with the prominent people of the region? Why is Festus holding this?
Trying to figure out something to read, right, to send to Rome.
Paul's basically appealed to the Supreme Court, and they're trying to present the case, as to, he's appealed to Caesar, and they have nothing to tell Caesar as to why people are accusing him.
So, I'll get to here in a second, Nancy. So, everyone has said, okay, you can see Caesar. Thanks for asking for Caesar. Top dog, you're going to go see him. They close the door, they put Paul away. What are we going to tell Caesar he's done? We have no idea. The only thing we can come up with is that somebody got in a fight at church, and then they got mad at Paul and people tried to kill him. Is that worth prison? Nancy.
it seems like not a single one of these people have the courage to do the right thing. They know they should just, because they're afraid of the backlash, and nobody wants to make a decision. They're all a bunch of feckless cowards.
Well, he needs to go to Caesar, because he's requested that, and that's his Roman right? So they are in a really tough spot,
Right.
because they can't let him go, because if they just let him, open the doors and say, oh, walk on home, he's dead, right? Because they're protecting him as well. But also, when we just read right here, the reason they're in a tough spot is when they send him to Caesar, they don't think he's done anything wrong, or they can't understand anything he's done wrong.
Nothing that he's done that's against Roman law.
Roman law.
Caesar's gonna be like, why are you wasting my time?
Yeah, and they have that pickle to deal with too. Kind of don't want to be on Caesar's bad side. If you're working for him, you don't want to be on his bad side, right? So,
No matter which Caesar it is.
yeah, it doesn't. They just replace each other of badness. So I think it's just kind of comical to see. All right, so I brought the king of Agrippa. I brought Bernice. We brought all the officials together in this room. We are having a board meeting to figure out what can we even put on Paul. We got to send him with something before he leaves, or else Caesar might just have all of us done. So we need to, not waste Caesar's time. Send something, but we can't figure anything out because everything that we have is just a little Jewish squabble. It's all just church problems, basically, is what they're saying. Religious disagreements. I don't know. I think this last half of 25 is just very interesting to see all this different perspective going on and to see what people are thinking.
As Nancy mentioned, though, think of this, now Agrippa and Bernice and an entire room of high-ranking officers and leading men of the city are going to hear the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Verse 25 or 23 tells us who all's in that room, right? Agrippa, Bernice, they came with great pomp and they entered the audience hall. So it's not just happening in a small room either, with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. So that sounds like a lot of people. Important people. Courtney?
And I just want to add, not only are they hearing this, but the Jews fighting against it actually adds credit to the story. Because if it was just an egregious lie, they'd push it away and say, who cares, you're stupid. But they're fighting it so hard that it kind of adds credit. It actually might be true, or they wouldn't be fighting it.
Yeah. And we've talked about Paul a few different ways here, but he was a good speaker. He came to people where people were at and spoke to them. But also, it obviously meant something because it caused big division among people. Big division doesn't happen among something that we can all just say is absolute baloney. It happens that, 50% of the people think this is truth and 50% don't. And that's the reason Paul was trying to be torn apart in the streets. So you're absolutely right, Courtney. There's a lot of credit behind all of this. And what he's going to say, because we already know he's talked about it, Festus already knows about it, is he's talking about this man named Jesus, who the Jews say is dead, but Paul says is alive. And so, we're already to the gospel. Festus is already learning about the gospel, and that's what Paul is going to share. So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, it's interesting, I think it's in verse 20 where Festus readily admits, and I'm not sure how to investigate that.
I love the human
Where
part
do
of
you
that.
start?
So verse 19 is where Paul talks about, Jesus, who Paul claims to be alive. In verse 20, Festus says, being at a loss of how to investigate these questions, I asked whether or not he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. He just keeps admitting, I have no idea how to deal with this. And I can't send him to Jerusalem because they're just going to kill him over this religious stuff.
Isn't it interesting that Festus, a Roman, has nailed the absolute crux of the matter? Dead man named Jesus whom Paul claimed was alive. That's what this whole fight is about.
Absolutely. That is interesting because we haven't had that explicitly written or said yet. We just know that the Jews have been after Paul, and they've said a lot of things in court that were just nothing. But yet Festus has still figured out that actually this is about Jesus. And it's about what Paul says about Jesus, and the Jews disagree with. Yeah, he's pinpointed it. He's got it right down to the truth of it. All right, any other comments here in chapter 25?
It's interesting that in this story we see emotion and ideology versus law and order.
Mm-hmm.
You see that a lot today.
Sure. And it's funny, the emotion and the ideology is on the very wrong side of things right here, isn't it? I mean, the Jews are coming at it because it's just, their whole argument is Paul's just wrong. Well, why? Tell us in court. Well, he's just wrong because he's just wrong, and we don't like him. He's wrong.
We don't like it.
Right? We don't like it. And that's what the emotional and the ideology side of it. Paul's not being a good Jew because he's talking about Jesus being alive. He's just wrong. But then we come to the officials. We've seen Felix and Festus, and we're going to go to Caesar. And they're just going, well, what are you talking about? The laws, he's broke none, you know? And we know that this is the set. He hasn't broke anything. The emotions and the appeal for that side is all gone. But here's to build on something, Larry. They're coming from a law point, but they're growing on the emotion and the investment on the opposite side of the Jews. Because we were just talking about, they're hearing the gospel. They're going to probably lean towards the believing that Jesus is alive here pretty quickly. And so, it's just so interesting.
Yeah,
to watch
yeah, and because they're gonna be like, why are these Jews so bent on this thing that he must be telling the truth?
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what Courtney was saying too, is like, they're so passionate about it, there must be some truth to it. Because you don't fight over somebody who everyone knows is just talking baloney. We all just say, oh, whatever. Yeah, crazy people over there. People don't fight over it. Half the city isn't divided on somebody that's just always talking nothing, right?
It does make you think, too, though, about your own expectations about how God's going to answer prayer. Because the baseline of all of this is that the Jews rejected Christ as the Messiah because the Messiah didn't show up in the way that they thought he was going to. He was going to come in, throw the Romans out, and make a new kingdom for the Jews. And he didn't do that. And because he didn't meet their expectations, he wasn't the answer that God was providing. And how many times do we pray and ignore the answers to prayer that God is showing us because it's not the way that we wanted God to answer the prayer?
We just don't see him.
That's what happened on that Sunday before the cross. You know, he rode in on a colt, you know, and everybody in the city was Hosanna, Hosanna, you know, laying leaves and coats and cloaks in front of them, you know, because that's what they expected. Okay, here we go.
He's the
Nobody's
king.
going to get their butts kicked. Well, you know, what the heck?
Yeah.
That turned turned around so far, so quick.
Absolutely. Dave?
I think, I hear some, but it sounds like it's dismissing a little bit too much of what these guys were thinking. It wasn't so much that it just, well, he's wrong. You know, our defense is he's wrong. There's those in there and they didn't just think that it's because of our power and everything else. There's those, Paul was one of them, that absolutely thought that Christ was gonna be the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jews, and believed it with his whole heart. It took the intervention of Christ himself
Absolutely.
to change Paul. And I think there's still those, even though there's people with everything, there are those that totally believe he is a destructive force and he's against God. So,
And I mean, that didn't just end at the Jews. I mean, we can know from our own personal experience that we can be so convicted on something and stand so strongly on something and then realize we were completely wrong. And I mean, we don't know that side of the story, you know, we don't know 2 years later on this one particular Jew, right? But we can stand so firmly on something and be fully convicted, but yet it still be the wrong thing. We realize that later. Good comments. We need to be done today, but to go back one last time to the answer to prayer. The Jews asked for a king, and they thought this king was going to be, taking the throne, and he wasn't taking the physical throne. And so the answer to prayer was a lot different than they expected. Paul's prayer was, let me get to the Gentiles. I'm going to go to the Gentiles, from the Jews to the Gentiles. And you know what? He's speaking to the Roman guard, and he's just going further and further away from Jerusalem. Physically, literally, with his message, everything. He's going out to the Gentiles. It's rough. It's not easy, but he's doing it. All right, we'll be done today. Thank you guys for your attention and your time. We'll be in chapter 26. And then come February, we're going to start in the book of Romans. We're just going to keep going in order in the Bible, not necessarily chronologically, just how it goes in the Bible. So, thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
I do.